Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Regina Geisner, and I'm a Vice President of the Collaborative WIM Alliance. Thank you for joining us today for our quarterly book club. Today, we will be discussing a book, Undiversified, The Big Short in Investment Management. But before we go there, and you all get opportunity to also mingle with some of your colleagues, first, I wanted to give the word to our host, CFA Society Italy, that we are welcoming with us today. So wanted to turn it over for a few words to Marcella Passi with CFA Italy.
Thank you, Regina, and hi, everyone. On behalf of CFA Society Italy, I want to thank all the team at Collaborative WIM Initiative for offering us the possibility to be the host society for today's book club event. This is an amazing partnership, and we are thrilled to be part of the CWIM community. Just a couple of words on our society that celebrated recently the 20 years of activity. We have around 600 members, of which 100 women. This sounds unfortunately pretty in line with the other fellow European society. But the good news, though, is that last year the board was appointed with 2 more women other than myself, therefore allowing us to reach the critical mass status, to quote Ellen and Katrina, the author of the book we will be presenting today, of 30% women in the board. With Michele and Valentina, we acknowledge our responsibility as board members in promoting and champion diversity initiative in our society. Just recently, we found out about the Young Women in Investment program promoted by CFA Institute and already live in Europe in countries such as France, Spain, and UK. For those of you who never heard about this program before, basically it consists in a 4-week training boot camp covering investment topics as well as soft skills, followed by internship opportunities that is totally dedicated to graduate women who may not have previously thought about a career path in our industry. And I'm happy to share with you the news that we are making initial conversation to bring the program also in Italy. Before passing it back to Regina and start networking, I want to thank also Anna Paola with Michela and Valentina, who will moderate the breakout room with me today, Marian Palma for helping organizing the event, and last but not least, Giuliano, that is president of CFA Society Italy, who is always super supportive of every new initiative that we propose. So thanks again, you all. I hope you enjoy the event, and Regina, back to you.
Thank you, Marcella, and thanks again for all the hard work on behalf of Collaborative WIM. So before we go into the breakout rooms, if you got housekeeping items, please do turn on your cameras on as we go through. You'll get an opportunity to join our amazing authors, Carr and Katrina Dudley, here in a second. But before that, we encourage you to mingle with your colleagues from all over the world who have joined us today and talk about some things that are related to the book, whether you read it or not. It's okay if you didn't do the homework. Your CFA charter will not be taken away from you. So, and no test will be given at the end of the book club. So please do not drop off. So here in a second, we'll be going into the breakout rooms. After the breakout rooms, feel free to send your questions into the chat or raise your hand, turn on your camera, and ask our authors live. With that, wanted to
Oh,
All right, looks like folks are coming back, so don't forget to mute yourselves. I know the conversation was really exciting, so I hope you enjoyed meeting your colleagues. And hopefully you got a few questions prepared for our authors. So I think everyone is back now here in the main room at this point. So again, as we start this, please feel free to send questions in the chat or raise your hand. But wanted to give a very, very warm welcome to Ellen and Katrina. Thank you so much for joining us today and letting us explore this topic, which is, I know, near and dear to a lot of us here when we talk about the big short in investment management. So first I wanted to talk about your bios, your stories, give us a little bit of a background on yourselves and how it's linked to the origin story of this book. How did it come around?
Sorry, I was searching for my mute button. I'll start and then Katrina can pick it up from me. So my background is I graduated from Kellogg Business School in 1999 and went directly to work in investment management for Capital Group. And over the ensuing decades, I transitioned from analyst to portfolio manager. More recently, I guess about a decade ago, I moved to a smaller firm that's a majority women-owned firm, and it's called Barksdale Investment Management. We do fixed income primarily. I've always been a credit person. Katrina and I like to joke that we have the yin and yang of perspectives. I'm a credit person, so the glass is half empty. She's an equity person, so the glass is half full. I also teach at Columbia Business School, and I'd say the genesis of the book really came from observing that the demographics of my students in the courses that I teach, which are primarily based on high yield and investment grade credit, looked somewhat like the headline numbers that we talk about in the book. So only 10% of portfolio managers are women. And my classes for the decade that I've been teaching at Columbia have looked pretty similar, with the exception that I would say in the last couple of years, perhaps coincident with the book coming out, they've been a little more female versus the overall student body at Columbia Business School, which is about 40% women. So I connected with someone in the publishing department at Columbia University Press, and just after that, and this illustrates the power of networking, I reconnected with Katrina, who I'd known for 20 plus years, but we had sort of lost touch. And I knew that she was in the industry. We started chatting about an idea for a book. One thing led to another, and we ended up co-authoring this book, which really brings together, you know, both of our perspectives as women who have been working in the industry for 20, 25 years, and also the perspectives of lots and lots of interviewees who we tapped for the book. Katrina, I'll let you take it from here. I don't think we can hear you, or I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear Katrina?
No.
Okay.
Does that work now?
Yes.
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 Okay.
We're having massive tech problems, which is why I'm tiny on the screen, because I am like literally sitting in front of the camera, which is supposed to have a 10 times zoom. It doesn't, so I apologize. So Ellen and I, it's so interesting to me because I always remember that same story that Ellen tells. And I'm like, she was talking about writing a book, and I put my hand up, and I tell people that because I always think it's the power of networking, but it's also the power of self-volunteering. And look where we are today. I have been in investment management for as long as Ellen has. And my frustration was when I started in this industry, I was the only woman in the room. And fast forward 20 years later, I'm still the only female often in the room. And it was that level of frustration. But I think that as we went through and we wrote the book, I want to be very clear that we wrote it with a very deliberate positive tone. We didn't want to write a book that blamed the men, because we didn't think that that would be productive, number one. Number two, as we go through this journey, we really wanted to acknowledge that men need to be our allies in this journey, not our enemies. So we wrote we did a lot of interviews, and each of those interviews was prefaced with this idea that it was a book that wasn't going to blame men, even if the interviews were with men or women. And it's our attempt to analyze the problem, kind of analyze where we're at. We talk about the investment management supply chain, which I know a number of people in my breakout were talking about, and then we look at how we can move forward.
Thank you both for that overview. So in your book, you do discuss the concept of the investment management flywheel. Can you give us a little bit more on that, especially for those folks who haven't read the book?
How about I jump into this, Ellen? And then, so we'll go back and forth here. So the flywheel concept comes from the idea that we interviewed a lot of undergraduates in the United States across a diverse range of business schools. And the conclusion from that research, one of the really telling conclusions, was you can't be what you can't see. So a lot of women were not entering into the industry because they didn't look up and see people similar or like themselves. And we identified that if you can't recruit people in, you can't retain them. And if we can't retain them, we can't promote them. And if we can't promote them, we don't have females at the top. And that was the flywheel. And so what we thought is that when we think about addressing the problems of the lack of women in investment management, you can't just attack one area of that problem or that supply chain. You need to do things across the entire supply chain. So you need to do things in order to recruit more women into the industry. It's about having exposure to those senior women through people, females lecturing at classes and going in there, being invited by their professors, women being on panels that are diverse panels. And then we talk about strategies once you get the women into the organization, how to retain them in the organization, and then how to promote them into that next leg of their career. Because one of the things that we discovered is that women often are promoted based on their performance, whereas men are promoted based on their potential. And we think that that's one of the barriers that needs to be addressed. And then, Ellen, you did a lot of research on the MBA channel, so maybe you could go into that part of the supply chain specifically.
Sure. So Katrina did a great job of talking about the flywheel. I'm going to talk about a discrete point on the flywheel, which is that MBA channel. And that, I don't know what it's like around the world, certainly in the United States for the larger investment management firms, that tends to be the entry-level position. So great example, I graduated from Kellogg and I went straight to work as an analyst at Capital. We had a student do a study for us of the Student Investment Management Club at Columbia Business School, and sort of thought of that as a microcosm of what happens at the MBA level. And we found that there were a number of barriers to women pursuing jobs, even at a prestigious school like Columbia, which has its value investing program as kind of the capstone program for people looking to get into investment management. The first one is they would feel intimidated by a lot of the men who probably had backgrounds in things like investment banking and other finance roles. So if they were career changers, they'd be sitting next to a guy, typically a white man, who spoke the language of finance, even if he didn't have direct experience in investing or investment management. And so when you combine that with the cadence of the recruiting calendar at business school, that basically says, if you want to do investment management, you have to figure that out basically day one of your first year and hit the ground running so that you can do recruiting in the fall and get a great summer internship. And that ends up being your job. It just can be incredibly intimidating to women. We know that women suffer from a structural deficit in confidence. There's a great book called The Confidence Code that looks at that in detail. And so given that investing is an industry that really lionizes confidence, even in the context of finding a job in investing and then transitioning into that role, it can put women at a real strategic disadvantage. The other thing we discovered, and I think probably a little bit of this takes place at the undergrad level as well, and I do think that companies are starting to look at their recruiting practices differently, maybe because they read the book, is that in the actual interviewing process in the MBA channel, there is often a stock pitch. So you have to spend, on average, I think our students who took the survey spent 50 to 60 hours developing a stock pitch for their interview. And this is basically where you go in and say, I love Google, because I guess it's called something else now. Obviously, I'm not an equity person, but I love Alphabet because of its growth potential. And, you know, Katrina and I always kind of like scratch our heads and think, what other industry makes you do the job before you get the job? So for the most part, industries anticipate that you're going to come up a learning curve when you start. But the stock pitch is a real confidence breaker, because if you approach a company and you've never even cracked a 10K before, and all of a sudden you're inundated with advice on how to do this, and you have to get this ready for the interviewing process in the first month, basically, that you're at Columbia Business School, it's not surprising that a lot of women with lower confidence just self-select out of it and go to work in investment banking, where there's a lot more jobs and you're probably, you know, a lot more likely to get a job offer.
Well, thank you. You know, I am actually in investment banking, so funny enough, but I did start my career in investment management, and I got selected out on a number of, you know, different reasons. And my next question is, when we talk about confidence, and you guys talk about the confidence, right? Women are typically, it's well-known fact, are less likely to apply unless they meet the 10 out of 10 job descriptions, when men are probably okay with the first 4 prerequisites to apply for a job. What are your thoughts on that? And, what are some actionable things that employers can do to encourage women to apply for those positions, whether it's, mid-career or entry-level? Would be very interested to kind of hear your thoughts on, job descriptions and recruitment, and what have you found?
Do you want me to start?
Tina, you have to answer this one, because she has a great anecdote about this, but I think you should tell that story.
Yeah, so we do a lot of work. You're exactly right. If there's 10 things in your job description, if men meet 6, they'll apply. Women, if they don't meet all 10, they won't. So that's the first part. So we are very deliberate about telling people to eliminate the non-preferred skills. Because if anything, if you have a line that says preferred, so I was looking at a job description for somewhere within my division, and it was written, interestingly, by a female. And I was going, and they wondered why we had such a low female response rate. And I hadn't been involved in the original writing. So I said, well, give me the job description and let me give you some feedback. So the first thing is we had a whole lot of preferred skills, including accounting. And I looked at them and I'm like, why do we need accountants? They're like, oh, we thought it'd be something that's nice to have. And if you're just putting in nice to have skills, you're already pushing a lot of women out of the pool. The second thing, as we look at some of these job descriptions, is they lead with company versus leading with purpose. So what does that mean? So we led off with a description of Franklin Templeton Investments and what we do and how great we are. And that doesn't resonate with women. Women want to work in a role and doing something that they feel is meaningful, that not only resonates with women, actually resonates also within the millennial generation. And so we need to talk about the mentoring opportunities, the career development, the idea of growth, working in a team. And you should lead with that. You also should lead with the fact that, a lot of our jobs, we talk about the Hollywood issue, about this terrible reputation we have. And our book is named after The Big Short. And I remind people, in The Big Short, men were doing research in strip clubs. And that's the image that's being portrayed. And so we need to really change that image, and we need to change that image through a media campaign, as well as how we describe these jobs. And we need to focus on the ESG work that we're doing to help make companies better and more accountable for the ESG efforts. And also we talk about, having investment security and delivering results that beat the benchmark with lower risk, and fit within a client need portfolio helps give people financial security. And that's something I think is one of the best things that we can do for any person. And so I think we need to kind of lead more in those job descriptions with purpose. So there's twofold. It's how you construct the job description, what you lead with, and then secondly, as you look at that job description listing, if anything has the word preferred in it, cross it out. I just was going through another job hiring description for another organization I'm involved in. We had another preferred. I'm like, just redline it out. And that needs to be just a deliberate effort.
Thank you. I know. I think that's a great point on the preferred. Reading that preferred list that sometimes is even longer than the non-negotiable list. You're just like, forget it, right? Not even gonna try. What about the last 2 years? How, in your research and your experience, how did the landscape change, pre-pandemic, and now we're looking at the post-pandemic? What do you think are the opportunities and pitfalls kind of for the organizations and for women who are trying to transition into investment management or are already and trying to, take themselves to the next level in the career?
I think we do the typical glass half empty, glass half full response on this. So I'll start with the bad perspective, and then Katrina can give the sun is coming out tomorrow perspective. So there was an early burst of enthusiasm for women's prospects based on work from home becoming much more acceptable. So there's no question that the pandemic has made it much more socially acceptable, shall we say, or professionally acceptable to work from home. And for the early part of that, it looked as though that would benefit women because we know that the family responsibilities disproportionately fall on women. I mean, this may be different in your own household. I would say this is actually different in my separated household, but for the most part, we know that to be true. So that's the good case. My concern is that as we move back to a work environment that is pretty much hybrid, so a group of people who always work from the office, a group of people who always work from home, and then people who go back and forth between a virtual and an in-office setting, the people who will self-select out of the always in the office crew are more likely to be women because of those family responsibilities. And as that happens, the intrinsic networking opportunities that just can't occur when you're doing only Zoom meetings, which are structured, which occur at the water cooler or whatever the equivalent is in other countries, those will continue to exclude women. And so we'll end up with this second-class citizenry for anyone who works from home, the preponderance of the time, that eliminates networking opportunities for them. And I don't think we know how this is going to play out over the next 10 years. I think there's a lot of office space in New York that's going to be reconfigured. But as long as companies keep an eye on the fairness of networking opportunities and make sure that they are broadly available to both remote and in-person and hybrid employees, that's the line that they're going to have to walk. Katrina, tell us the good story now.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I do have this hope that work from home, if we go back 3 or 4 years, and I told you I had 2 employees, one came into the office 5 days a week and one did 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. The presumption would be that it was the woman who did the 3-2. And I hope now we've just kind of made it much more gender neutral in terms of that ability to work 3-2. And I'm seeing that even within my own firm. It's interestingly, we're in the reverse situation where a lot of the people who we're having to pull back into the office or who are pulling where, who don't want to be back even 2 days a week or 3 days a week, or some of our men. So the women seem to be much more willing to come back into the office. So it's just an interesting dynamic. I go back to some of the Rutgers research, and Ellen is right. I always look for the optimistic case. I'm an equity investor. I mean, we are by nature optimistic. And I think in this situation, some of the research that they did is that, number one, the men in households who were doing 5 hours of housework per week. I mean, I know most people here do 5 hours of homework, housework and chores and house infrastructure work per day, but per week went from 11% pretty measly up to 20. So we doubled almost. So that's a good thing. So more men are actually participating and helping out in their households. But in those 2 career households, they found that working from home had productivity and also just positive benefits for both the men and the women. And I think that that's really interesting. So you had both of the parties in that relationship finding that they were more productive and also they were happy with their jobs. I want to just end though with one thing, and it comes out of the McKinsey study and the McKinsey work that has been done. And it is something that I think needs to be addressed by companies, and it is a concerning statistic, is that women in manager positions are increasingly self-reporting very high levels of burnout. That statistic is over 1 in 2 women. And I think that that is concerning because burnout is the first sign that someone is about to leave. And I think that companies need to do something to address that burnout. And I think a lot of that burnout is coming from 2 issues. First of all, women do double the amount at their own companies of work in terms of increasing diversity and supporting diversity initiatives as their male counterparts, and that work is uncompensated. And then secondly, during COVID, when people had issues and a lot of family issues, they naturally went to the female manager versus a male manager. So there was a disproportionate burden and extra work responsibility placed on the shoulders of women, and that's now showing itself in those burnout statistics. And so I am very concerned that companies, there is an urgent need to do something about that. That is probably, though, not a comment about investment management specifically. I think it's just a general comment about all women across a variety of industries.
Thank you for that, Ellen, Katrina. Yes, I definitely agree that the burnout is real and needs to be talked about. And I think women are probably the last on the list to go out there and say that they are burnt out, right? Our perfectionism does not allow us to complain and sometimes to admit to the fact that we have a lot of things on our plates between family and work and trying to please everyone. I know we did get some questions from folks here, and
Regina, do you want me to read them out?
yes, thank you. I do apologize. I did have also some tech issues, so I had to call in from my phone, and now it's slightly hard to find that chat.
Don't worry, you have your team to back you up. So I'll go ahead and read the one that came in. It was from Cynthia. So this is for Ellen and Katrina. In your experiences, has age discrimination been a bigger battle for women? And what tips would you have for those who are more seasoned with their work experience?
I'll start answering this. I just turned 51, so I'm much older than I look. I realize that. But I have started to wonder at what point you go from being, a dynamic portfolio manager to being viewed with, more skepticism if you're looking for a job. One of the things, especially, I think this may be even more true in fixed income than equities, that is really differentiating people these days, especially younger, new hires, is technology fluency. So when you think about, a core fixed income portfolio, the Barclays aggregate, which is the index we typically use, has 12,000 line items. That's 1,000 with a TH. And the systems requirements, whether it's AIM and Port in Bloomberg, or we have several other systems that we use for attribution, for various types of data analysis, those are overwhelming, and those tend to skew the skill set for really understanding the systems tends to skew younger. So I think in response to the question about what can more seasoned, which is a nice way of saying old in some cases, people in the industry do to make sure that they're still relevant, it is absolutely to stay up to speed on those systems. The flip side is more than really any other industry, this one should reward tenure, right? Because markets move in cycles. And if you've seen one cycle, you've seen one cycle. And yet at the same time, there's a certain familiarity to the patterns in the high yield market, for example, which is where I spend most of my time. And so I think really emphasizing, on your resume, I invested through the 2000 .com bubble, and then, 9/11, and then the great financial crisis, and then 2020. I think that those touch points and knowing that you know how to look through various types of cycles is something that you absolutely need to emphasize if you're job hunting. Katrina, what would you say?
I think that one of the things we emphasize in the book, we study gender diversity because there's a lack of it in our industry. It's very noticeable that only 10% of portfolio managers are women, and we represent give or take 50+% of the population. So we focus on that. But I think when we talk about diversity, we talk about diversity in both the way we studied it, but also more generally. And I think that a lot of people have focused on gender diversity and racial diversity, but we also think that there needs to be diversity in finance from educational backgrounds. The worst investment team to me is 5 white men who all went to Princeton together. That would be called a hedge fund. But that's the kind of antithesis of what we want. We want age diversity because it's experiential diversity in that team. So I think that you've seen the benefits of having age diversity, from Eric Schmidt when he joined Google to be kind of the adult in the room. You had Sheryl Sandberg as another tech example. In investing, we need that same level of examples. And it goes back to what Ellen said. It's that you need to emphasize that you've got the technology savvy, so you're keeping up with the younger people, but you also have this experience that just can't get replicated, because the only thing that a young person can't accelerate is time.
Wow, that's very powerful. Thank you for that answer. There's another question that came in, but before I read that, also just want to remind everybody that feel free to use the raise your hand function on Zoom. We still have a good 8 minutes left, so we'll call on you and you can come off mute and ask your question directly. But the next one that came in, this was from one of the breakout rooms. So Marcella submitted this question, and she said that they discussed the lack of Northern Stars in investment in the investment management industry. In the book, your profile a constellation of female investors. As in the book, how did you choose these women, and are there any common traits in their stories?
I think wasn't it interesting, Ellen, that we do think there were a couple of people we interviewed us who wanted us to anoint them the female Warren Buffetts, and we deliberately chose not to. We also chose not to self-anoint ourselves as the female Warren Buffett equivalents. We wanted to show through having a constellation that there were a diverse range of women who could be successful in this job. So we wanted to show, particularly to the younger women looking at this career, there's not one way to be successful. And then finally, as to how we got them, we were very deliberate. They all came through referrals. We didn't want to just mine our Rolodexes and get people that we knew, and that it was through that we got introductions to people such as Michelle Clayman, who's founded the Clayman Institute at Stanford University, which studies the issue of women in finance and these issues. And she was one of the first founders of a female-owned mutual fund. So that's how we did it. And then Ellen, do you want to talk about how you went about some of the interviews as well?
Yeah, and I'm going to apologize. I have a hard stop at 12:55 Eastern, so this is going to be my last response. But similar to what Katrina said, we did cast a pretty wide net, but focused on our referrals. I will say that the cautionary tale for having kind of a Northern Star of investment from a female perspective is Cathie Wood. And whether you agree with her approach or you don't agree with her approach, I would certainly argue that the amount of negative coverage that she gets is absolutely there is a component of gendered bias in that. And so, I keep wondering, why the Financial Times doesn't do a better job of comparing her fund to, the theoretically billions of other hedge funds that have had, similar downturns in this market that we're going through. And so I think going back to that concept of the constellation, women are probably going to get bad press when their results go bad in a way that is even worse than famous male investors. And so that would give women pause for being out there the way that Cathie Wood is, for better or for worse. I mean, she has probably single-handedly introduced a generation of young women to the concept of investing. And if you're a young woman without a lot of confidence and you see what she goes through in the press, you might self-select out of the industry. I'm going to take my leave.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. You're in good hands with Katrina.
Wonderful. One more question came in, Katrina. So Ellen had mentioned the confidence code, which we shared in the chat, a link to purchase that book. So follow-on question, are there any other book recommendations that you have found impactful that you would recommend to our community?
So we do speak a lot during the book about what Iris Benet wrote about what works, and that's much more of a technical study of various things. So we probably gave a summarized version of what she wrote about, and I do highly recommend that book. But let me take it a different way, because I actually have a philosophy. So my book reading process is I read one nonfiction and then I read one candy book, as I call it. And that was one of the things that I deliberately did. Once I had kids, I think we all it's easy to stop reading. The fact that you have this book group, I commend you, because it keeps you reading. It's a good commitment to do. And it also helps you make connections. So, I think about what I recommend or what I wish I'd done when I was younger. And it's that continue to read. And I think it's, as you say, we talk about the distractions and everything that happens as you move further and further along. And so I do think that being able to read and continuing to read more, and that then, as we talk about throughout the book, will help so many other things. Books have been the basis of my conversations with a number of people as I've managed up in the organization. It's the way I've found to connect with them. But, I read a lot and I read very widely.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I feel, what the contribution of this book has created a connectivity where, as Regina said in the very beginning, that we all have a very, first person experience being in the industry. And, personally, I'm reading the book and I feel like I can relate to these stories, and I don't feel that I'm the only one that has experienced it. And for that, we're really grateful to have you and Ellen contribute in this way so that we can develop a network around it. So we're so happy that you have done this, and then we heard that there is a second book. Is that in the works?
We're about to go into contract this week, hopefully, on our second book. So we'll start that process then. But look, I tell a lot of these people here, use the book to your advantage. I've done it. And so what did I do? Basically, I do a lot of work for our firm on diversity, which gives me a great platform. But interestingly, one of the statistics I learned when I was doing the research for the book is this idea that women are promoted based on performance and we promote men based on potential. So I looked at our top investment professionals. I said, look, here's some objective evidence that maybe we are promoting men based on potential. So let's pilot. And that is one term I recommend everyone learn when you're going into your HR department, is to pilot, because it's such an easy thing for the HR department to agree to. But think about programs that they could pilot to give you the skills for that next job before you get the job. Mm-hmm. And maybe you need to have an executive coach to help you get that skill set, but have them pilot it with you. Don't make them firmly commit, But there's some of the things where you're able to use the book. And that's what we want to see. We want to see people using the book, using the suggestions to help them make a difference in their career, wherever they are in their career. At the early part of the career, I think it's harder to have these kind of bespoke solutions. But as I think about women at my age, at Ellen's age, and even a little younger, you need some more of these bespoke solutions. And there's too many of them to put into an entire book. But I do think that if you can think in terms of this idea of what types of things can I get now from my company to help me do that next job, and that will then help me get that next promotion. Hopefully the book is, will give you the kind of firepower in order to have those HR conversations.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's amazing, and definitely we are a huge supporter of everything that the two of you are putting out there. So we really appreciate the friendship and the relationship that we are building with one another. So I just want to be respectful of your time, and I know we're about at the top of the hour. This has been truly amazing and inspirational to have the two of you here to bring life to the book. And we really hope that everyone here enjoyed their time and developed some connections in their individual rooms. Our next upcoming event is November 10th, which we'll share a slide with as we end. But just wanted to really thank you, Katrina, and also Ellen, who had to leave a couple minutes early, that we have really enjoyed this time with you together.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And we hope to see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.